It was one of those quiet Saturday mornings when the world feels peaceful, and 40-year-old David had woken up early with that familiar weight in his chest. 2 years had passed since he lost his wife to a long battle with illness, and weekends were still the hardest. His 2 kids, 8-year-old Lucy and 6-year-old Tommy, were staying with their grandmother for the weekend. She always insisted on taking them every other Saturday, saying he needed time to breathe and heal. David appreciated the gesture, but the empty house felt too quiet, too full of memories. The coffee mug his wife used to drink from still sat in the cabinet. Her favorite blanket was still folded on the couch exactly where she left it. Some days he could almost hear her laughing in the kitchen or calling the kids for breakfast. That morning he decided to do what he always did when the silence became too much. He grabbed his hiking boots and headed for Pine Ridge Park. The park was about 20 minutes from his small house, and it had miles of trails that wound through thick woods and around a peaceful lake. Walking helped clear his mind, and the physical activity tired him out enough that he could usually sleep better at night. David had been a regular at the park for over a year now. He knew most of the main trails by heart, but today he felt like exploring somewhere new. Maybe getting lost for a while would help shake off the sadness that seemed to follow him everywhere. He parked his old pickup truck in the gravel lot and noticed only 2 other cars there. Perfect. He preferred the quiet trails where he could think without running into joggers or families having picnics. He started on the main path but quickly turned onto a smaller trail he had never tried before. This one was overgrown in places, with branches reaching across the narrow dirt path and roots that made him watch his step. The deeper he went into the woods, the quieter it became. No sounds of traffic or people, just birds chirping in leaves, rustling in the gentle morning breeze. About 30 minutes into his walk, David heard something that made him stop in his tracks. At first he thought it might be an animal, maybe an injured deer or dog. But as he listened more carefully, he realized it sounded like someone crying. Not the loud crying of a hurt child, but the quiet, desperate sobbing of someone who had been crying for a long time. His heart started beating faster. Should he call out? What if someone was hurt and needed help? David had always been the type of person who couldn't walk away when someone needed assistance. It was one of the things his late wife had loved about him, his big heart and willingness to help strangers. He followed the sound, pushing through some thick bushes and stepping carefully over fallen logs. The crying was getting louder, and now he could hear what sounded like someone trying to speak, though the words were muffled and unclear. Then he saw her. About 50 feet ahead, tied to a large oak tree with thick rope, was a woman in what looked like a wedding dress. The white fabric was torn and dirty, stained with mud and what might have been blood. Her dark hair was tangled and had leaves stuck in it. A wedding veil hung from the tree branches above her head, fluttering in the breeze like a ghost. David stood frozen for a moment, trying to process what he was seeing. This couldn't be real. People didn't just tie other people to trees. Maybe it was some kind of joke or prank that had gone wrong. But as he got closer, he could see the woman's face, and there was nothing funny about the terror and exhaustion in her eyes. Her makeup had run down her cheeks in dark streaks. Her lips looked dry and cracked. The rope around her wrists had rubbed them raw, and she was shivering despite the warm morning air. When she saw him approaching, she tried to speak but could only make weak, hoarse sounds. "Oh my God," David whispered, breaking into a run toward her. "What happened to you? Who did this?" As he got closer, he could see that she was probably in her late 20s, with olive skin and large brown eyes that looked at him with a mixture of hope and fear. She was beautiful, even in her current state, but what struck him most was how scared she looked. Not just scared of her situation, but scared of him too, as if she wasn't sure whether he was there to help or hurt her. "It's okay," David said, softly, the way he talked to his kids when they had nightmares. "I'm going to help you. I'm not going to hurt you." He pulled out his pocket knife and carefully began cutting the ropes around her wrists. His hands were shaking, partly from adrenaline and partly from anger at whoever had done this to her. The rope was thick and had been tied tight. It took several minutes to cut through it completely. "Water?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I have some in my truck," David said, working faster on the ropes. "We're going to get you out of here right now." When the last rope fell away, the woman collapsed forward. David caught her before she hit the ground, and he was shocked by how light she felt, as if she hadn't eaten in days. Her wedding dress was expensive looking, made of silk and lace, but it was ruined now. One of the sleeves was completely torn off, and there were dirt stains and small tears all over the skirt. "Can you walk?" David asked. She nodded weakly, but when she tried to stand, her legs gave out. David realized she had probably been tied to that tree for hours, maybe even all night. Her muscles were cramped and weak from being in the same position for so long. "I'm going to carry you to my truck," David said. "Is that okay?" She nodded again, and David carefully lifted her in his arms. She was heavier than he expected because of the full wedding dress, but he managed to carry her through the woods back toward the main trail. Every few minutes he asked if she was okay, and she would nod or whisper yes in that same hoarse voice. As they walked, David's mind was racing with questions. Who was this woman? Why was she in a wedding dress? Who had tied her to a tree, and why? Was her attacker still around? Should he be worried about his own safety and hers? When they reached his truck, David gently set her down in the passenger seat and grabbed the water bottle from his cooler in the back. She drank it so fast that he worried she might make herself sick. "Slow down," he said gently. "You'll get sick if you drink too fast." She looked at him with tears in her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." "What's your name?" David asked. "Maria," she said, her voice getting a little stronger now that she had some water. "I'm David. Maria, we need to get you to a hospital. You look dehydrated, and I think you might be in shock." Maria started crying again, but this time it seemed like relief mixed with fear. "He left me there to die," she whispered. "I thought no one would ever find me." David felt his heart break a little. He thought about his own kids and how he would feel if someone hurt them like this. He thought about his late wife and how she always said that good people had a responsibility to help when they could. "Well, I found you," David said firmly. "And whoever did this to you is going to pay for it. But right now, let's focus on getting you safe and healthy." As he started the truck and began driving toward the nearest hospital, David realized that this morning had changed everything. He had woken up feeling sorry for himself and his lonely life, and now he was responsible for helping this stranger who had been through something terrible. He had no idea that finding Maria tied to that tree would change both of their lives forever. The emergency room at Valley General Hospital was busy that Saturday afternoon. But when David walked in carrying Maria in her torn wedding dress, everything seemed to stop. Nurses rushed over with a wheelchair, and within minutes, Maria was being examined by doctors while David sat in the waiting room, still trying to process what had happened. A police officer arrived about an hour later. Officer Patricia Wells was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who had dealt with domestic violence cases for over 15 years. She sat down next to David and pulled out a small notebook. "The doctors say she's going to be okay physically, officer," Wells said. "Dehydrated and exhausted, but no serious injuries. She's asking for you, actually. She wants to thank you properly." David nodded, still feeling like he was in some kind of strange dream. "Has she told you what happened?" "Some of it," the officer said carefully. "But I think she trusts you more than she trusts us right now. Would you mind sitting with her while she tells her story? Sometimes victims feel safer with someone they know nearby." When David entered Maria's hospital room, she looked much better. The nurses had cleaned her up, and she was wearing a hospital gown instead of the ruined wedding dress. Her hair was brushed, and some of the color had returned to her face. But her eyes still held that haunted look of someone who had been through something terrible. "David," she said, reaching out to grab his hand, "I can't thank you enough. You saved my life." "You don't need to thank me," David said, sitting in the chair next to her bed. "Anyone would have done the same thing." Maria shook her head. "No, not anyone. You could have kept walking. You could have minded your own business." Officer Wells sat on the other side of the bed with her notebook ready. "Maria, I know this is difficult, but we need to know what happened so we can catch whoever did this to you." Maria took a deep breath and closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, David could see her gathering strength to tell her story. Yesterday was supposed to be my wedding day, she began. I married Robert Chen at St. Mary's Church downtown. It was a beautiful ceremony. My whole family was there, his family, all our friends. Everything was perfect. She paused and David squeezed her hand encouragingly. After the ceremony, we went to the reception at the Grand Hotel. Everyone was dancing and having fun. I was so happy I thought I was the luckiest woman in the world. Her voice started to shake. But then during dinner I started feeling dizzy and confused. I thought maybe I was just overwhelmed with emotion, you know? It was such a big day. Officer Wells was writing everything down. What happened next? Robert said I needed some fresh air. He helped me outside to his car, and I remember thinking it was sweet that he was taking care of me. But then I started feeling really sick. Like really, really sick. The world was spinning, and I couldn't think straight. David felt his stomach tighten. He was starting to understand where this story was going. He drove me somewhere, but I was so out of it that I didn't know where we were going. I kept trying to ask him, but my words were all slurred and wrong. When we stopped, I realized we were in the middle of the woods somewhere. Maria started crying softly. He dragged me out of the car, and that's when he told me the truth. He said he knew about the baby. Baby? David asked gently. Maria nodded, placing her hand on her stomach. I'm 3 months pregnant. But the baby isn't Robert's. It's from someone I dated briefly about 6 months ago before Robert and I got back together. We had broken up for a few weeks and I was with someone else during that time. Officer Wells looked up from her notes. Did your husband know about this before the wedding? I thought he did, Maria said. I told him about the pregnancy 2 months ago and I explained that the timing meant it might not be his. He said he didn't care, that he loved me and wanted to raise the baby as his own. He said it didn't matter whose it was biologically. But he was lying. David said quietly, yes. When we were in the woods, he told me he had been planning this for weeks. He said he couldn't stand the thought of raising another man's child, but he also couldn't stand the idea of me being with someone else. So he decided to get revenge. The room was quiet except for the sound of machines beeping in the hallway. He said he wanted me to know what it felt like to be abandoned and betrayed, the way he felt when he found out about the baby. So he tied me to that tree and left me there. Officer. Wells shook her head in disgust. How long were you out there? All night and most of the morning. He left me around 10 o'clock Friday night. I was so scared. I kept thinking about wild animals, or what would happen if it rained, or if no one ever found me. David felt anger building in his chest. What kind of person could do this to someone they claim to love? There's more, Maria continued. Before he left me, he told me he was leaving town. He said he had emptied our joint bank account and was going somewhere. I'd never find him. All our wedding money, my savings, everything is gone. We'll find him, Officer Wells said firmly. Do you have any idea where he might have gone? He always talked about wanting to live somewhere tropical. He has a friend who moved to Costa Rica last year. Maybe there. As Maria continued telling her story, David learned more about her situation. She was a kindergarten teacher who had been saving for years to buy a house. Robert worked in finance and had always been controlling about money, but she had trusted him enough to combine their accounts after they got engaged. I don't have anywhere to go, Maria admitted. Our apartment was in his name. My car is at the hotel from yesterday. I don't even have clothes or my purse or anything. Your family? David asked. Maria's face fell. They're all back in California. I moved here for Robert's job 2 years ago. I don't have many friends here yet, and the few I do have don't really know me well enough to help with something like this. David felt his heart breaking for this woman. She had been betrayed by the person she trusted most, left to die in the woods, robbed of her savings, and now she was alone in a city where she barely knew anyone. What about the people at your wedding? Weren't they worried when you both disappeared? Robert told everyone I was feeling sick and that he was taking me home to rest. He said we'd call them later. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, he was long gone. Officer Wells closed her notebook. Maria, we're going to do everything we can to find Robert and get your money back. But in the meantime, do you have somewhere safe to stay? Maria shook her head, looking lost and scared again. Without really thinking about it, David heard himself saying, "You can stay with me." Both women looked at him in surprise. "I mean, just until you figure things out," David said quickly. "I have a guest room, and my kids are with their grandmother tonight anyway. You shouldn't be alone right now." "David, I can't ask you to do that," Maria said. "You've already done so much. You're not asking, I'm offering. Besides, my late wife always said our home should be a place where people could feel safe when they needed help." Officer Wells smiled for the first time since David had met her. "That sounds like a good temporary solution. Maria, you'll need to come to the station tomorrow to file a formal report and work with our detectives." As the paperwork was completed, and Maria was discharged from the hospital, David realized his quiet, predictable life was about to become much more complicated. But looking at this brave woman who had survived something so terrible, he knew he was doing the right thing. His wife would have been proud. The first week of Maria staying at David's house was awkward for both of them. David had set her up in the guest room, which had been his late wife's craft room before she got sick. There were still boxes of yarn and half-finished quilting projects, stacked in the corner, and David apologized every time he saw Maria looking at them. "I keep meaning to go through her things," he said on Tuesday morning as he made coffee. "But it's harder than I thought it would be." Maria was sitting at the kitchen table, wearing one of the outfits that David's sister had brought over. She was about the same size as Maria, and had insisted on providing some basic clothes until Maria could figure out her situation. "You don't have to explain anything to me," Maria said softly. "Grief doesn't follow anyone else's timeline." David looked at her with surprise. Most people tried to give him advice about moving on, or told him what his wife would have wanted. But Maria just understood. That afternoon, David had to go back to work. He was a high school history teacher, and he had already taken Monday off to help Maria deal with the police and insurance claims. He felt nervous leaving her alone in the house, not because he didn't trust her, but because she still seemed fragile and scared. "Are you sure you'll be okay by yourself?" he asked for the third time. Maria smiled, and it was the first real smile he had seen from her. "David, I'll be fine. I'm not going anywhere, and I promise I won't touch anything I shouldn't." "That's not what I'm worried about," David said. "I just want to make sure you feel safe." When David got home that evening, he found Maria in the kitchen making dinner. She had cleaned the whole house and was cooking something that smelled amazing. "You didn't have to do this," David said, but he was touched by the gesture. "I wanted to," Maria said. "It's the least I can do. Besides, cooking helps me think." They ate together at the kitchen table, and for the first time in 2 years, David's house felt like a home again. They talked about small things, her job teaching kindergarten, his students, the weather. Normal conversation that felt precious after everything that had happened. "Can I ask you something?" Maria said as they were washing dishes. "Of course. Why did you help me? I mean, really. You could have just called the police and left me there for them to find." David was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to answer honestly. "My wife used to volunteer at a women's shelter," he said finally. "She always said that people in crisis need someone to see them as human beings, not just as problems to be solved. When I saw you tied to that tree, I didn't see a stranger. I saw someone who needed help." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "Your wife sounds like she was an amazing person." "She was," David said. "She would have liked you." The following weekend, David's mother-in-law brought Lucy and Tommy home. David had explained the situation to her over the phone, and she had been supportive but worried. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" she asked quietly while the kids were playing in the backyard. "You barely know this woman." "I know enough," David said. "She's been through something terrible, and she needs help. Besides, the kids could use some positive female energy around here." He was right about that. Lucy, who was 8 and missed her mother desperately, was immediately drawn to Maria. Tommy, who was 6 and didn't remember his mother as clearly, was more cautious but still curious. Maria was wonderful with them. She didn't try to replace their mother or act like she belonged there permanently. Instead, she treated them like the smart, interesting kids they were. She helped Lucy with her homework, played video games with Tommy, and listened to both of them talk about their friends and their worries. "She's really nice," Lucy told David one night when he was tucking her into bed. "She doesn't talk to us like we're babies." "Is it okay that she's staying here?" David asked, suddenly worried that he had made a mistake. Lucy thought about it seriously. "Yeah, it's okay. She makes you smile more." David realized his daughter was right. For the first time since losing his wife, he was smiling and laughing regularly. Maria had a good sense of humor, and she seemed to understand when he needed space, and when he needed company. But their growing friendship was complicated by their circumstances. David felt guilty for being attracted to Maria so soon after his wife's death. Maria felt guilty for enjoying the safety and comfort of David's home when her own life was in ruins. One evening, about 3 weeks after Maria had moved in, they were watching a movie together after the kids had gone to bed. It was a comedy, and they were both laughing when suddenly Maria started crying. "I'm sorry," she said, wiping her eyes. "I just realized this is the first time I've laughed since my wedding day. It feels wrong to be happy when my whole life has fallen apart." David turned off the TV and moved closer to her on the couch. "Maria, you've been through something horrible, but being happy doesn't dishonor what you've been through. It means you're healing." "How do you know?" she asked. "Because I've been there," David said. "When my wife died, I felt guilty every time I smiled or enjoyed something, like I was betraying her memory. But then I realized that she wouldn't want me to be miserable forever. She'd want me to find reasons to be happy again." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and David realized that Maria had become more than just someone he was helping. She had become his friend, and maybe something more. The turning point came a month later when Robert's lawyer contacted Maria. Robert had been arrested in Costa Rica for financial fraud involving his previous job. He was fighting extradition back to the United States, but it looked like he would eventually have to face charges for what he had done to Maria. "The good news is that you might get some of your money back," the lawyer explained over the phone. "The bad news is that it could take months or even years." That night, Maria sat David down for a serious conversation. "I need to start making plans for my future," she said. "I can't keep living in your guest room forever. It's not fair to you or the kids." David felt his heart sink. He had gotten used to having Maria around. The house felt alive again, and the kids were happier than they had been since their mother died. "Where will you go?" he asked. "I've been thinking about moving back to California, closer to my family. I could probably get a teaching job there, and I'd have help with the baby when it comes." David nodded, trying to look supportive even though the thought of Maria leaving made him feel empty inside. "That makes sense," he said. "Your family should be there for you." But that night, David lay awake thinking about how quiet the house would be without Maria's laughter, how much Lucy and Tommy would miss her, and how much he would miss their evening conversations and the way she hummed while cooking breakfast. The next morning, Lucy asked him directly, "Is Maria going away?" David realized that his feelings for Maria weren't just about his own loneliness. His whole family had grown to love her, and losing her would be another kind of grief for all of them. But he also knew that Maria had to make the choice that was best for her and her baby, even if it meant breaking all their hearts in the process. Just when David and Maria thought their lives were starting to settle into a peaceful routine, everything changed on a Tuesday morning in November. David was getting ready for work when his phone rang. It was Officer Wells from the police department. "David, I need to speak with Maria right away," she said, her voice tense. "Robert has been extradited back to the United States. He's in custody, but his lawyer is already causing problems." Maria was in the kitchen making breakfast for the kids when David told her the news. The color drained from her face, and she had to sit down at the table. "What kind of problems?" she asked quietly. "Officer Wells wants to meet with us this afternoon to explain everything," David said. But she sounded worried. That afternoon at the police station, they learned just how complicated their situation had become. Robert's family had hired one of the most expensive criminal defense attorneys in the state, a man named Gregory Pierce who was known for destroying victims' credibility in court. Mr. Pierce is claiming that his client was emotionally distraught when he left Maria in the woods, Officer Wells explained. He's saying it was a crime of passion, not premeditated kidnapping. He's also questioning Maria's character and suggesting that she manipulated Robert into marriage while pregnant with another man's child. Maria felt sick to her stomach. But that's not true. I told Robert about the pregnancy before we got married. He said he wanted to raise the baby as his own. We know that, Officer Wells said. But Pierce is good at creating doubt. He's also raising questions about your relationship with David. He's suggesting that you two were involved before Robert left you, and that's why you moved in together so quickly. David felt his anger rising. That's completely false. I found Maria tied to a tree. I helped her because it was the right thing to do. I believe you both, Officer Wells said. But Pierce doesn't need to prove his theories. He just needs to create enough doubt to help his client avoid serious prison time. The legal battle that followed was unlike anything David or Maria had ever experienced. Pierce's team hired private investigators who dug into every aspect of their lives. They questioned David's neighbors, Maria's co-workers, even the kids' teachers at school. At David's high school, rumors started spreading among the parents. Some people supported David and admired him for helping Maria, but others whispered that there was something inappropriate about the situation. A few parents even complained to the school board, questioning whether David should be teaching their children. Mr. Thompson, the principal, Mrs. Rodriguez, called David into her office one Friday afternoon. I need to ask you about your living situation. David's heart sank. He had been expecting this conversation but dreading it. Maria is staying in my guest room temporarily while she recovers from a traumatic experience, David said carefully. There's nothing inappropriate happening. I believe you, Mrs. Rodriguez said. But some parents are concerned. They're asking questions about your judgment and whether this situation is affecting your work. Has my teaching suffered? David asked. No, not at all. If anything, you seem more engaged with your students lately. But perception matters in this job. I'm not asking you to change anything, but I wanted you to know that people are talking. That same week, Maria started having complications with her pregnancy. The stress of the legal case and the constant scrutiny were taking a physical toll. Her doctor ordered bed rest and warned that continued stress could lead to premature labor. I can't do this anymore, Maria told David one night after a particularly brutal day of depositions. Pierce's questions made me feel like I was the criminal, instead of Robert. And now I'm putting your job at risk and affecting your kids. David sat on the edge of her bed where she had been resting all day. You're not putting anything at risk. We're going to get through this together. But what if we don't? Maria asked, tears streaming down her face. What if Robert gets away with what he did? What if you lose your job because of me? What if something happens to the baby? David didn't have answers to those questions, and that scared him more than he wanted to admit. The situation got worse when Pierce filed a motion claiming that Robert should have parental rights to Maria's baby. Even though blood tests had proven that Robert wasn't the biological father, Pierce argued that Robert had married Maria believing the child was his, and therefore had established a paternal relationship. It's a long shot, Maria's lawyer explained, but if it works, Robert could demand custody or visitation rights. It would give him power over Maria for the next 18 years. That night, David found Maria packing a suitcase. What are you doing? He asked. I'm leaving, she said without looking at him. I'm going back to California to stay with my sister. This whole situation is destroying your life, and I won't let that happen. Maria, stop, David said, gently taking the clothes out of her hands. You can't run away from this. The legal case will follow you wherever you go. But at least you and the kids will be safe. Lucy and Tommy don't deserve to have their lives turned upside down because of my problems. David realized that Maria was trying to protect them the same way he had tried to protect her. But he also realized that losing her would hurt his family more than any scandal or legal battle ever could. Do you know what Lucy asked me yesterday? David said. She asked if you were going to be her new mom, and when I didn't know how to answer, she said she hoped you would be. Because you make our family feel complete again." Maria started crying harder. "David, I can't be anyone's mom right now. I can barely take care of myself." "You don't have to be anything right now except yourself," David said. "We love you just as you are, problems and all." The crisis reached its peak a few days later when Maria went into premature labor at 32 weeks. David rushed her to the hospital, calling his mother-in-law to watch the kids. As he sat in the waiting room during the emergency delivery, David realized that he was about to become a father figure to another child, one who wasn't even biologically his. The thought should have scared him, but instead it filled him with determination. This baby, Maria, Lucy, and Tommy, they were his family now, and he would fight for them no matter what anyone else thought. When the doctor came out and told him that both Maria and the baby were stable, but would need to stay in the hospital, for several weeks David felt relief wash over him. They had survived this crisis and they would survive whatever came next. But as he sat by Maria's bedside, watching her sleep with her tiny daughter in the incubator nearby, David knew that their biggest challenges were still ahead of them. Robert's trial was approaching. The custody battle was intensifying, and the whole community was watching to see what would happen to their unusual family. David had never been more scared in his life, but he had also never been more certain about what he wanted. He wanted Maria, he wanted to raise her daughter as his own, and he wanted them all to have the chance to heal and be happy together. The question was whether the world would let them. The NICU at Valley General Hospital became David's second home for the next 6 weeks. Every day after school he would drive straight to the hospital to sit with Maria and watch over her tiny daughter, who they had named Hope. The baby weighed only 3 pounds when she was born, but she was a fighter just like her mother. Lucy and Tommy visited every weekend, pressing their faces against the glass window of the NICU and talking to their new baby sister through the barrier. They had started calling themselves Hope's big brother and sister without anyone telling them to, and it melted David's heart every time he heard it. "She's so little," Tommy whispered during one visit, his 6-year-old eyes wide with wonder. "But look how strong she is." David watched Hope's tiny fingers wrap around his pinky, and he felt the same overwhelming love he had experienced when his own children were born. Biology didn't matter. This baby was his daughter in every way that counted. Maria was recovering. Well, physically, but emotionally, she was struggling with everything that had happened. The stress of the legal case, combined with the exhaustion of having a premature baby, had left her feeling overwhelmed and scared about the future. "What if I'm not a good mother?" she asked David one evening as they sat beside Hope's incubator. "What if I can't protect her the way I couldn't protect myself?" "Maria, look at her," David said softly. "She's alive and healthy because you're strong. You survived something that would have broken most people, and you brought this beautiful little girl into the world. That makes you the strongest person I know." The turning point in their legal battle came from an unexpected source. Robert's cellmate in the county jail was a man named Miguel Santos, who was awaiting trial on unrelated charges. Miguel had overheard Robert bragging about his perfect plan to humiliate Maria, and had recorded some of their conversations on a smuggled phone. When Miguel's lawyer offered the recordings to the prosecution in exchange for a reduced sentence for his own client, everything changed. The recordings clearly showed that Robert had planned Maria's abandonment weeks in advance, had researched the most isolated areas of the park, and had specifically chosen to drug her at the wedding to cause maximum humiliation. He also talks about emptying the bank accounts and planning his escape to Costa Rica, Officer Wells told David and Maria during a meeting at the hospital. These recordings destroy any claim that this was a crime of passion. This was premeditated kidnapping, theft, and attempted murder. Pierce, Robert's expensive lawyer, tried to have the recordings thrown out of court, but the judge ruled they were admissible. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Pierce advised Robert to accept a plea deal rather than risk a trial that could result in life in prison. Robert was sentenced to 15 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution for the money he had stolen. More importantly, he signed papers giving up any claim to Hope, acknowledging that he had no biological or legal connection to the child. "It's over," Maria said when they got the news. "He can't hurt us anymore. But even with Robert out of their lives, David and Maria still had to deal with the judgment and speculation from their community. Some people saw their relationship as a beautiful love story born from tragedy. Others whispered that it had all happened too fast, that David was taking advantage of a vulnerable woman, or that Maria was using David for security. The criticism hurt, especially when it affected the children. Lucy came home from school one day in tears because some classmates had said mean things about her family. Tommy got into a fight with a boy who called Maria a bad word he didn't even understand. Maybe we should move away, Maria suggested one night after a particularly difficult day. Start fresh somewhere else where people don't know our story. Running away won't solve anything, David said. Besides, this is our home. Our real friends and family support us, and the people who don't matter anyway. David was right. Their closest friends rallied around them, and even some of the people who had been critical changed their minds once they saw how happy and stable the family had become. Mrs. Rodriguez, David's principal, publicly supported him when some parents continued to complain. David Thompson is one of the finest teachers I've ever worked with, she announced at a school board meeting. His personal life has never interfered with his professional duties, and his students respect and admire him. This school is lucky to have him. Hope came home from the hospital just before Christmas, healthy and beautiful. David had converted his home office into a nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow and assembling a crib that Lucy and Tommy had helped pick out. Christmas morning was magical. Hope slept peacefully in Maria's arms while Lucy and Tommy opened presents under the tree. For the first time in 3 years, David felt like his family was complete. But the most important moment came a few weeks later. David had been thinking about it for months, planning and worrying and second-guessing himself. Finally, on a snowy Saturday in January, he asked Maria to take a walk with him in Pine Ridge Park. They bundled Hope up in a warm blanket and walked along the same trail where David had found Maria 6 months earlier. When they reached the oak tree where she had been tied up, David stopped. I know this might seem like a strange place for this, David said, his heart pounding. But this tree represents the worst moment of your life and the moment that brought us together. He got down on one knee in the snow and pulled out a simple diamond ring that had belonged to his grandmother. Maria, I love you. I love Hope. I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you both feel safe and loved and cherished. Will you marry me? Maria started crying and laughing at the same time. Yes, of course, yes. But David, are you sure? I come with a lot of baggage. We all have baggage, David said, slipping the ring onto her finger. The difference is we're carrying it together now. They were married 6 months later in a simple ceremony at the same church where David had married his first wife. Lucy was the flower girl, Tommy was the ring bearer, and Hope slept peacefully in the arms of David's mother-in-law during the service. Maria's family flew in from California, and David's friends and colleagues filled the pews. Even Officer Wells attended along with several of the nurses from the hospital who had cared for Hope. The reception was held in David's backyard, with string lights and Maria's favorite flowers everywhere. As they danced their first dance as husband and wife, David looked around at their guests and realized that their story had touched more people than he had ever imagined. 2 years later, their family was thriving. Hope was a healthy, happy toddler who called David Daddy and had wrapped him completely around her little finger. Lucy and Tommy were both doing well in school and had never questioned that Hope was their real sister. Maria had returned to teaching and found special purpose in working with children from difficult family situations. David had been promoted to assistant principal and was respected throughout the school district for his dedication and compassion. They still faced challenges, of course. Maria sometimes had nightmares about her experience in the woods. David occasionally felt guilty about being happy when his first wife couldn't be there to see their children grow up. Hope would eventually have questions about her biological father that would be difficult to answer. But they faced these challenges together as a family. They had learned that love doesn't always come in the package you expect, and that sometimes the most broken people can heal each other in ways that seem impossible. On quiet evenings when the children were asleep and the house was peaceful, David and Maria would sit together and remember how far they had come. from a moment of terror and abandonment in the woods to a life filled with love and hope. Sometimes the best things in life come from the worst circumstances, and sometimes the person who saves you is the one who needs saving too.